Hello and welcome to another episode of the Self-Made Podcast. On this episode, I have the pleasure of speaking to Amy Wilson. Amy is a girl that I used to work with back in London, and from the day she came into a job interview, I knew this girl had something special about her. She had a drive, a commitment, and a passion for the industry that I didn't see in every trainer that walked in through the door. This girl is incredibly skilled in the gym, having a really successful career in bodybuilding, through the ups and the downs of bodybuilding, and as well as recently over the last year, moved out to Dubai and set up her own business, becoming a personal trainer and an online coach over there. This is a really interesting episode where we talk about the highs and the lows of bodybuilding, what got her into bodybuilding, how this has affected her career, and what are the pros and cons of going into such a very intensive sport, tracking all the time, how this affects her life, how this affects her relationships, and how this formed who she was as a person. We then discuss her time in the industry and how she succeeded in what is still to this day a very male-dominated world, and how she managed to stand out and get the respect from her male peers, colleagues, and clients. We also discuss the situation right now in bodybuilding with many athletes dying young. What is her thought being in that world of why this is? Why are so many bodybuilders dying tragically early, both males and females? This is a really interesting episode. Great fun conversation. And as ever, if you enjoy this episode, please share on social medias, dropping myself a tag at Kingsley Dutton and Amy a tag as well. And I will leave the link to her in the show notes. So I will leave you with myself and Amy Wilson. So, for anyone that doesn't know you, Amy, tell us a little about who Amy is and what she does.
Okay, so I am a one-to-one PT and an online trainer. My background, so originally my degree is psychology, and actually from university I kind of worked for a mental health charity for a little bit. Moved away from that, went into teaching, and then after that I decided that I wanted to become a personal trainer. So I trained to do my personal training certificate. What sort of prompted me to do that was I had been following bodybuilding as like a passion, and I'd actually started competing in that as well. So it kind of just made sense for me to kind of combine my interest and sort of aspects of my previous careers and go into coaching. So now I'm over in Dubai. So I'm based out of a gym here and also working online.
So you mentioned obviously going into teaching, having a degree in psychology, which is sort of related but sort of out of left field. So what is it that made you go from what is a stable career? What made you take that leap? Because that's a big move to jump into, personal training, which is not only far less stable, but probably at the time you did it, probably a very male-dominated world. So that must have been a huge move. So what made you take that jump?
So I actually went traveling. So I quit my job in teaching and I decided I was going to go traveling because it was like the last year that I could get my visa to go across to Australia. So I did Southeast Asia, Australia. And when I was in Australia, I actually got really ill. So one night I just started having seizures, and I was airlifted into the hospital in intensive care, and they didn't really know what was wrong with me. And in the end, they found out that I had encephalitis, which is like an inflammation of the brain. So it was pretty serious. I was put into a coma. My parents came out to Australia. It was all a bit hit or miss. But yeah, so that kind of made me, it was quite a scary experience for me. And came back home, was out of work, wasn't allowed to work for 6 months, wasn't allowed to drive. And I kind of just went, you know what, why am I doing a job that I'm not passionate about? Like, I loved teaching, but it kind of got a little bit stale. It wasn't something like, you didn't wake up excited to go to work in the morning. You kind of went, okay, right, we've just got to power through this day. And I loved bodybuilding. It was like the one thing that I was really passionate about. So it just made sense to me at that point to just take a risk on it. Like, it didn't really have anything to lose at that point.
Do you feel you became more, happier to take risks ever since having that, what happened to you in Australia? Because it is that thing, was like, well, this could all happen tomorrow, so why don't I take a jump? Or do you feel that hasn't changed that mentality?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I've always been quite spontaneous anyway. I think yes, you kind of go, well, I might as well. And then I think also, sounds really bad, but because like my parents' view on things also slightly changed. So I think previously, if I'd have said, "Oh, mum, I'm going to quit my job as a teacher and become a personal trainer," she'd have been like, "No, don't be so ridiculous. No, you're not." But after you've been through something like that, they kind of go, "Well, actually, what's most important is that you're just happy." And I think having that support of people around you as well kind of makes you more, and yeah, it gives you that push to kind of go for things that maybe you wouldn't have if people around you were saying it was a stupid idea.
What's the recovery process like for something like that? Because it's something I'd not if I hadn't heard of before you told me in the past. But like, what's the recovery process like that? How did that affect your training and your bodybuilding and everything like that?
It's really different person to person. So mine was, I couldn't walk. When I came out of hospital, I had to have physio to kind of get myself moving again. I was in a wheelchair for a little while. Which kind of really affected me mentally. And I remember when I was allowed to go back to England, I went to speak to my doctor, and basically everyone from like the hospital and things was telling me, don't exercise, don't do this, like look after your body, you need to sleep a lot. And I remember I spoke to my doctor and he was like, well, actually no, because not doing the things that you're used to doing, so not going to the gym, not exercising, I didn't have any purpose to my day. I wasn't allowed to work. I couldn't drive. So like my contact with my friends was limited. And actually like going to the gym was the only thing that I could still do. Like admittedly, I was I remember going in and doing like body weight squats and things. But yeah, it was kind of like, it then gave me a purpose, which actually helped my recovery in that sense, because otherwise I was just sitting at home sort of waiting for days to pass.
And like, did you find that it took a while to get back to a certain level that you were at? Like, what was the actual, now you were told that you could go back in the gym, what was that recovery process like to you being in, better than you were before?
Oh yeah, I would say it probably took me a solid 6-8 months to kind of get anywhere close to like strength wise what I was at before. Because obviously my recovery was just so affected. I think because my body was obviously focusing on repairing like my brain, actually then my recovery from sessions was also limited as well, because it wasn't my body's priority at that point. So yeah, I kind of just got back in. I was just getting my nutrition back again. I gained a lot of weight in hospital, like a scary amount of weight in hospital. So I just kind of wanted to get back to like feeling myself again as well. But yeah, it took a while.
So what was it that made you go into competing in the first place? Because obviously this must have been a passion of yours already for you to be the thing that got you out of bed after what happened. So like, tell us a little bit about like the, your starting in training, what got you started and why did you go into competing?
So I'd always been into sport, like just throughout school and things. And then I went to university and I just stopped completely. And like went out drinking all the time, like party lifestyle, got a bit fat. And it was after uni. I wasn't like overweight, but I was just fat for me. So after university, like I remember like I joined a gym, went to loads of classes, and my boyfriend at the time actually was a personal trainer. And he was like, why are you going to classes? Like come to a session with me. And I was really strong. I was actually like, I moved quite well. I was quite strong. And for me, having then someone tell me I was good at something and like I got a plan and I followed it and I progressed really well. I built muscle quite easily. And for me, it was kind of like the rate of progress was what then got me hooked, because I felt like I was really seeing like visible changes. I was feeling better. I got into the nutrition side of things and started like reading bodybuilding.com on an evening and like trying out different diets. Yeah, and then I remember I was just in my local town, Scunthorpe, where I was training. They had a local bodybuilding competition, and one of my friends was like, "Why don't you do it?" And I was like, "No." And then the following year they had it again, and he was like, "Come on, let's do it." So I gave it a shot, and yeah, kind of from there, I think with bodybuilding, you can always look at an image of yourself and you go, right, this is what I want to improve on. And then you can kind of set a plan and work on that particular aspect. So I like how it's very easy to like identify where you want to improve.
I always think, I'm obviously not a bodybuilder in the same way you're a bodybuilder, but, training in a sort of similar manner, especially in the place that we both worked. And I think bodybuilding essentially is that hobby that keeps on giving, in the sense of there's always something else to do. Like, you never really master it. Like, in every aspect, like even if you get really good at a lift, there's something to improve the skill wise on it. In terms of your physique, as soon as you make something a strong point, something else then becomes a weak point. Like, there's always something to work on. Like, it's something that is always, at least in my opinion, I'm sure in yours, it's always mentally stimulating.
Yeah, definitely. Which can be bad as well, because obviously you never go, okay, I'm really happy with how I look, because you're always focusing on the next thing to improve. But yeah, for me, it became such a lifestyle. And I think there's a huge community as well in bodybuilding. And particularly at the time where I was living, where I was working, sort of up in the north of England, there was a big like bodybuilding community, and it was almost like the same girls did the same shows, and it was a real social aspect to it as well, which then keeps you hooked in, because all your friends are doing it and you become friends with this group of people, and then you've got your little network, and it kind of rolls on through that.
Do you think that really helped you like really get stuck into bodybuilding? So obviously a lot of things that we see with clients, and even with yourself at times, I'm sure, is that like your environment really can either make or break you. Like, and did you think like do you think you would have stuck it out if you were in a place that maybe didn't have such a bodybuilding scene and community? Or do you think that friends that maybe had different interests trying to pull you away would have affected you?
Yeah, I think the community aspect was a huge thing. And actually, because I competed quite a lot, and my last 2 competitions I competed in a different federation and a different class. And I didn't know anybody who was also in those classes, in those categories. And even just the prep, I found loads harder, because I didn't have people to speak to who were in the same boat. I remember there was 2 girls before, when I was competing in toned figure for the NABA. And we used to have a group chat, and we'd joke about like who was hungrier that day, like how many egg yolks you were allowed. And just having that, knowing that other people are going through the same thing, which, like you said, also with clients, I think is really important too, because it just creates that bond and that sort of sense of camaraderie. And if they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think that's why there's a massive advantage on like coaches that have walked the walk and done it themselves, because like for you found that environment, you went and sorted out because you loved it. Whereas someone that might come and see you might not. You might be the only person in their life that has that common interest. You might be the only person that's sort of pushing them. And I think I remember vividly your job interview when I interviewed you for our previous work. I can only wholeheartedly apologize. But like I remember like there was such like for you, what stood out was that presence of you clearly had done it before, you clearly were interested in the craft, and you kind of like had a true love for it. Like, do you feel like that you developed a massive intrinsic motivation for bodybuilding, or was competing the thing? Was there an external thing that drove you initially, or did you always have I'm doing this for me sort of thing?
I think I'm one of those people where if I'm rewarded for something, it makes me enjoy it more. Everyone's the same, I guess. If you're good at something, you're therefore going to do it more. And I think for me, the fact that I did do quite well was the thing that then kept me motivated as well. But I've always enjoyed sports. I'm one of those people, I get a buzz out of activity. So when it's like going for a bike ride, going for a hike, it makes me feel good. I get the endorphin rush from exercise. And yeah, I think that's something that, you kind of need. You need that enjoyment from it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, as I say, if you're trying to translate this onto clients, like finding that something that makes this sort of intrinsic to you becomes really, really important. Like the people that love the process tend to go further. When it comes to bodybuilding, like there's always that element of sort of contention of whether the lifestyle is a positive or a negative in terms of it being obsessive, or as you mentioned earlier on, like you're never quite happy with where how you look. Like having competed for many years, and I don't think you competed for a while, right? Like looking back on your bodybuilding time up to this point, what are some of like the biggest like positives you've taken away from the sport, and some of the negatives that you've either got through or you've taken along with you from the sport?
I think the positives are probably just going to be I think like sticking with something and seeing how when you execute a plan, for me, I was on a plan for probably 5 years, and actually seeing how when you do stick to it, you then get the rewards, and seeing also how you can like deviate from a plan and it just slows the progress down so much. I know we said about a lot of coaches like walking the walk. There's probably a lot of personal trainers and coaches out there that have never actually had a full year of consecutive training, dieting, nailing their nutrition, thinking about the sleep and the supplements. And actually having competed, it kind of keeps you accountable in that sense, where you then actually learn what can be achieved. And it gives you that knowledge of what clients can achieve if they can string together.
You mentioned the
that
long
level
term
of commitment.
You mentioned like people not dieting for 10, 12, 20 weeks. They're talking about looking after your diet for, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Now, one of the things I often see with people is that it's easier to motivate yourself when you've got a goal like 8 weeks down the line, 10 weeks down the line, 20 weeks down the line. What were the things that sort of kept you driven and kept you focused in the times where there wasn't a set deadline? What kept you on the straight and narrow where you didn't really have anything immediately pressing to push towards?
This is something I actually spoke to someone about a few years ago when I was like pushing to compete again. And I think it like almost becomes a sense of your identity. And I think that's what then kept me focused, because that was my perception of myself, was that like I was a bodybuilder and this is what a bodybuilder does, which was positive for me in the sense that it kept me on track during that time. But then it later became quite a negative thing for me, because when it was no longer a good time for me to be competing, because I had that identity as I'm a bodybuilder, I felt like I was something that was part of my life I needed to do, even though actually I didn't. It can, again, pros and cons of bodybuilding.
Yes. Yeah. And it's an extreme version of someone trying to force a diet when they don't want to, like trying to force a show, because you have to go to such extremes. If you're not feeling it, it's never going to end well. What was some of the things that you felt that was potentially the negative aspects like of bodybuilding?
Hugely for me, like the health aspect of just being lean, and like even just for a female, for me, training, I trained 5-6 days a week for years. Like I wouldn't have time off going on holiday. I wouldn't have time off over Christmas. And hormonally, that can mess you up quite a lot as a woman. So things like losing your cycle was just normal for me at that point. And the GPs in England aren't great for it. So then having like a medical professional saying, oh, it's fine, like it'll come back, kind of just, when actually...
We'll tell you to stop training. Which you got a girl comes in with a lot of muscle mass, you tell her to stop training, you're not going to listen to it, even if it was the right advice.
But and I think for me as well, another reason why I decided to stop competing was kind of the social implications of it. So like I said, I used to go on holiday and train, and then it kind of became, I'd go on holiday with my family, and our whole holiday then became, right, when does Amy need to go to the gym? Was like a group consideration. And in later years, I kind of went, actually, it's really unfair enough to be around me. Like my hobby shouldn't be taking over everybody else's lives into the extent that it did.
Yeah, I certainly feel that way now. Like, I mean, I'm currently 3.5 weeks out from a photo shoot, and it's been a totally, in a good way, and some points forced, some points not, but it's a totally different diet to the ones that are in London, because Hong Kong is such a social beast. Like someone can say, do you want to go for a beer? And I can be out in 10 minutes. Like, it's so sociable. There's places don't have ovens. I've had to work around things, where it's much, much trickier. And I think it's given me much of an appreciation in terms of where that line is and what you can still achieve with a little bit of balance. Now, I'm not going to be Mr. Olympia or Chris Bumstead anytime soon, but I'm certainly feeling a better place than my first photo shoot at UP, where like I remember taking Tupperware box to a funeral. Like my fiance granddad died, and I had my chicken and broccoli. I'm like, I'm such a dickhead. Like, who does that?
My mum, we'd go out for family meal, and I would take my chicken, because I used to diet really hard, and to be fair, all over it was chicken and veg. But I used to take my like pre-cooked, pre-weighed chicken in a Tupperware, and I'd order a side salad with no dressing, and then I'd like tip my Tupperware onto the salad. And my mum used to be so embarrassed of me. She was like, you can't do that. Like, just ask them to make you some chicken. But for me, like, the idea of somebody else weighing my chicken, and it might not have been exactly the amount of chicken that I wanted.
I remember once there's a place called the Himley House Hotel near me. It's the same shoot, probably about 3 or 4 weeks later. Yeah, and I remember they had a carvery, and I said, my mum was like, "No, you're not taking your Tupperware box to this." So I was like, "Okay, I'll work around it." And I remember panicking when I tasted my Coke Zero and going, "What if this isn't Coke Zero? What if they made a mistake?" And that level of paranoia when you get to this stage, because it, there's so many benefits, I think, of having a deadline. It pushes you to get out your comfort zone and take the necessary steps to go further than you think you could ever believe. But I think the downside of that is it becomes a big weight over your head for a period of time. Like, every action becomes so super important, So you mentioned obviously the hormonal side, and that's obviously the big thing, especially for women in terms of staying. And I've seen photos of how lean you've got, and it's full on skeleton face lean.
Like my face goes.
Like, talk to me a little bit, like, how was the recovery from that? Like, is that something that's taken a while to sort of get over in terms of things like getting your cycle back and improving your hormonal health and things like this, or did you sort of bounce back quite easily?
So I think when I started competing, the coach I first started with was amazing, and I'd never say a bad word about him. And I've spoken to him since, and he has said, like, he knows so much more now than he did when we first worked together. And at the time, it just wasn't really something that we really were concerned about. Whereas now, like, speaking to him and knowing other girls that he coaches, it is something that he's very aware of. And it's something that they're really focused on now, is like, as soon as you finish prep, get your cycle back. But it just, honestly, I think because my coach wasn't concerned, I wasn't really concerned. And for me, it was only when I stopped competing and then it still hadn't come back, but I was like, okay, this is not weird. And like going to the doctors and getting hormone tests and things. And then, so I did a photo shoot in, oh my God, when was it? 2019. So 2 years ago. And again, so then it went again. Mm-hmm. And after that, for me, that was when I started like looking into it and researching it. I can't remember what her name is, but there's a girl and she's done a YouTube series. It's about like going all in, she calls it.
Stephanie Buttermore, isn't it? It's,
yeah.
And
I started then watching that. And actually it was really interesting. So I particularly like the idea of, so I think she said something that's like, right, when you're at a point, you've dug the hole, you can't just stop digging. You need to actually actively fill the hole back in. So you need to actively gain fat. And I remember I did my photo shoot in November, and then that's what I did. So after the photo shoot, I stopped tracking all food. I reduced my training intensity, and I actually, like, for the first time in my life, made an effort to put on body fat, because I'd stopped dieting, I'd stopped competing, but honestly, I stayed lean, like for years and years and years. I stayed lean. And that's why it kept on going again. It would come back, it'd go. I'd have like a period and I wouldn't have another one for 6 months. And after watching that, I went, okay, actually, like maybe I need to fix this issue properly. So that's what I did. And from there, everything's been fine. But I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, is you can't just kind of stop losing weight. And lots of girls go, oh, but I'm eating at maintenance, it's fine now. Or sometimes you've got to eat in a surplus to actually then get it back, and you've got to get fat, which is depressing, but sometimes it's needed.
How was the mental battle back? So I remember times where you went on your stories and you say, I'm stopping tracking food. And I remember watching the stories, and I was quite like enthralled watching your stories every day, because it was just like, it was such a battle, it seemed like, for you, because it was such a routine of like tracking everything all the time. It's just your sort of the way you've been doing things for so long. Like, how was that transition moving away from tracking, and how did that sort of
It was weird. And the thing I found most interesting as well was I used to always be hungry, and I just thought I was kind of like normal. I was just like, oh, I'm just always hungry. And nowadays I'm just not. Like, I can go 6 hours without eating and I don't die. Whereas before, the idea of like going more than 2.5 hours without a meal, I would have been so hungry. So that was another interesting thing I found about it. But yeah, the fat gain is I think again, it's like it's other people's perception of you, and particularly like I've always been really active on social media. So for me, it was kind of like other people, what would they think about me getting fat? Which is probably why I felt the need to then document why I was doing it, because it's almost like you need to explain yourself. So it's kind of less about how I was almost less about how I felt in myself and more about what other people would think about me.
Okay, that's
I'd never really minded being bigger, and actually before my last two shows, I did quite a heavy bulk. So I'd been bigger at that point. But it's kind of almost, it's other people become very much like, oh, you've let yourself go, without knowing why.
Like, did you get any of that? Like, because obviously you did document it and you said that was partly to explain your actions. Like, did you get any of that for having a fairly big social media profile, like from people you knew or didn't know, going through that process? Was there any backlash from people?
No, see, I've never had, I know those people like, oh, I get horrible comments. I've never really had anyone say horrible things on my Instagram. My block list is very long now.
Okay.
If anyone says anything negative, I just block it because I just think, well, it's not really something you need. But no, I think as long as people can see you're still training, as long as you're still like promoting mostly a healthy lifestyle, then yeah.
I also think it's one of those things that people tend to fear more than it's actually the case. Now, I think things I've learned as I've gotten a little bit older is that, you know, you spend so much of your time in your late teens, early 20s of worrying what people are going to think of you, worrying what people are going to think of your physique, how that affects your, you know, the message you put across, you know, or in everything. And then you realize people are so wrapped up in their own world. And if there's anything this pandemic has shown is how wrapped up people are in their own world, that no one gives a fuck about them. And when you realize that, I realized that was quite freeing. I think that was the time where I was able to push social media more because I can be more authentic in myself, because it was like, no one else cares, so I might as well be me.
Yeah.
I
know.
Yeah, so I mean, like as you said, it's been what? When was the last time you competed? We'll say about 3 years ago.
2018, yeah.
And do you have plans to ever do it again, or is this you done?
I don't think I could. I think I kind of peaked. I'm older now as well, so there's that sense of it's going to be harder to get lean. It would be harder to get as lean as I did before. I just don't feel like I've got anything to prove. I feel like I did it to a high level. I achieved what I achieved. So I don't really feel like I need to prove anything else now. I think I'd probably do photo shoots and things again, because to get to that level of conditioning it's not too bad. But then to push from that, particularly like in bodybuilding as well. So I've always done figure. Yeah. And like I carry too much muscle to do any class less than that. But the issue with female bodybuilding is as muscle mass increases, so does the level of condition that they require. So for like bikini class, figure, and women's physique, like the level of muscle that they want you to have, but also the level of conditioning. And it just gets further and further. So figure conditioning is basically now the same as physique conditioning. And there's a girl who, she got her pro card, I think it was last year, in both figure and physique in the same show. So for me, it's kind of like the expectation is just moving further and further. And to get to that point, I'd have to push outrageously hard, which I'm just not. It would affect so many other areas of my life. It would affect my career. It would affect my relationships. It would affect everything else. So,
and like it's one of those things where I think bodybuilding is. I don't want to take anything away from any other sport in the world, but I do think it's one of the hardest sports, because less so these days as more and more athletes are taking it seriously. There's more like knowledge around nutrition in terms of performance, but still to a degree, it's the sport you can never shut off. It has to encompass every second of every day to focus around a deadline. It's not like you finish your training, you know, you eat relatively healthy and you're pretty good to go. You know, you have to be on it for all time. Was that a hard thing to let go, like having such a routine and structure, or did you just channel that into other areas of your life? I
think, it's difficult. I think since I moved to Dubai, I probably had the least structure I've had in years. But still, I'm very structured with my food. I probably still eat like the same 10 foods most days, but most people do. It's just I still eat the same 10 foods I ate when I was competing. So I still ate my chicken, I still ate my eggs. Yeah, you kind of stick to those routines that you had. But it's almost, I know a few of my friends actually who have competed and have had eating disorders even from competing or prior to competing. I think a lot of the time with bodybuilding, it's almost like a comfort blanket. And I sometimes when I get stressed, I kind of go, right, I'm going to go back to like having a meal plan, because it's nice. It's quite comforting sometimes to have that like stability in your life.
I can totally see that, and I can see, like, even with, you know, not going, like, I've never got on stage, and I've gotten probably pretty close, if not at stage lean in the past, and but I tend to find, for me, that structure, as you say, is really comforting, because I'm not a person that's particularly organized or admin focused or anything, but I tend to find that when I'm dieting for a photo shoot, in my case, I tend to manage my finances better. I tend to get my life in order. I tend to manage everything else better. Like, because the main part of your day, how you're eating, when you're training, when you're doing your cardio, creates a structure for the whole 24 hours. You tend to push every other aspect of your life so much better, or at least I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you feel that that's the reason why a lot of people get hooked on bodybuilding? Because it has a big crossover.
Yeah, and I think it's like eating disorders. A lot of it stems from control. I think bodybuilding, a lot of it stems from control. You want to control every aspect of your life. And kind of that's why people like it, because you feel very in control. You feel like you're progressing day to day. You feel like you're getting better.
Yeah.
So, and you're so busy. You can kind of just ignore anything else.
Yeah, exactly. You're always trying to distract yourself from the hunger, right? No, I've booked so many more podcasts in the last couple of weeks, and this is exactly the reason why. Because I'm hitting low carbs now on 1,300 calories, and I'm like, okay, no. So, like, I suppose, going off, not really on a tangent, but I'd be intrigued to get your take on this. We can't really have a chat about bodybuilding this week of all weeks without trying to get your thoughts on, obviously, Sean Roden this week, Mr. Olympia passing away. And obviously we've had a few over the last couple of years. I mean, obviously we have Dallas McCarver, who, you know, obviously wasn't directly probably the same thing. Who was it? Luke Sando? 6 months ago? And then obviously John Meadows, may rest in peace. You know, like, what is your take on the people, you know, the amount of people dying young in bodybuilding? Why do you think that is? And, you know, what do you think's your stance on that?
So I don't follow men's bodybuilding that much, but actually a couple of months ago as well, there was a massive thing about female bodybuilding and particularly diuretics.
Oh, I know. I know the coach you're talking about here. That's trouble. Yes. So
this was a coach who actually I inquired about coaching on a recommendation from a friend, and so I nearly worked with that particular coach as well.
Scary.
But yeah, I know. And I think, like I said before, it's kind of just how the mark of the gatepost for what is desirable in bodybuilding is changing. So I know, like I said, in women, it's sort of leaner and leaner, more muscular. And in guys, they're just bigger and bigger and bigger. Like every single year now, the size that they need to win is just ridiculous. Somebody won 10 years ago wouldn't even have a chance on the stage nowadays, which obviously then is encouraging people to use more and more and more drugs. So yeah,
do you think? I mean, obviously, you know, it's in the case of this coach and his female athletes. You know, this is going to sound things very, very gear related, and I've heard some of the cycles that was coming out through this, and absolutely mortifying, and in links that where it's very obvious that this prep has done them in, because it's like dying 24 hours after a show in the hotel room, things like this. But like with the male bodybuilders, I mean, how much do you think is actually directly gear related? Do you think it's more about just carrying that amount of size?
I think it's more about just the size. Your heart's not made to support a body that big at the end of the day. And I know, like, a few of my friends are having like PAP masks on while they sleep because they're so heavy now, and the weight on their chest, the body just can't breathe whilst they're laid on their back. And I think it's more like the size of people now. Obviously in off-season, guys are pushed so big as well that then they can't walk or they can't move as well. So then their cardiovascular fitness is decreasing as well on top of that. And yeah, I think it's just got to the point now where it's just too much.
Yeah.
But I also think now, because of that, a lot of guys are now choosing to do, like, people don't seem to be into bodybuilding as much. People are more into like the muscle model, a male physique kind of looks.
You can see that by the popularity now of Chris Bumstead now,
Yeah.
and how marketable he has become over, Big Ramen. In 5 years ago with Jay Cutler, Phil Heath, the monsters were the draw.
Mm. Well, they did it with women, didn't they? They got rid of female bodybuilding from the Olympia. They've actually just put it back in. So yeah, they pulled that class completely at one point from the Olympia, because women were just having to push to such extremes to be in that category. But actually, they pulled it from the Olympia to try and stop that level of pushing. And again, now in female bodybuilding, and particularly in like figure class and women's physique, you get marked down for any signs of like masculination through the face. Yeah. So things like they look at hairline, they look at jawline, and they'll mark down for that now.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds quite a harsh thing and quite a prejudiced thing, but when you actually look at it, this could be the start of keeping someone safe. And we all know people can work their way around drugs tests, but maybe that's harder to work around in those things. It may discourage people using substances that could make it end up being like that, I suppose. With I think I always like the conversation about this, about bodybuilders and like how many of them dying young, because a lot of the press will be, especially with Sean Rowan at the moment, will be on the gear use. Yeah. And it flies in the face of everything that I've met in terms of people using gear. Because some of the people I know that have openly used gear are the healthiest people that I've ever met in my life. They're getting their blood work done every 6 months. They pick their poison. And, these things are considerably healthier, really, than going out and doing loads of Charlie and getting drunk and eating kebabs on the weekends. And, the horror stories often come from the people that are doing the gear because they don't really like the idea of dieting. But sort of when you get to that level, that's not really the concern. And I know a lot of people, maybe you don't see the middle guys getting that in the same way though into it. It is only the real heavyweights that tends to be sort of fall to bits.
I think it must be more the size than the actual, because as well, it's not like, obviously, like lower down the ranks, you're going to have the people that are dying or getting ill because of like bad drugs. But these are people who their drugs will all be like pharma tested. They'll be checking that exactly what's in it is in it. So it seems unlikely. They'll all be working with doctors. They'll all be, monitored.
Do you think going back to the issue we've had recently with female bodybuilders, do you think the things coming out about this coach will lower the rate of these drugs being used, things like DMP and heavy diuretic use, or do you think these will just continue to grow in popularity as sport grows in popularity?
No, I think people are now becoming very aware. So I know a couple of like female, but Donna Murphy, she used to be a women's physique competitor. And there's another woman I used to speak, she was women's physique, American woman. I don't know, I did a podcast with her once actually. And Rosie Hart, she used to be women's physique. She actually competed for England for UK in the Olympia. So these three women in particular are all now basically talking about drug use a lot more openly. So I know Donna recently has been like sharing what she's used previously, what's been safe, what's not. And I think it's just it's taking away the stigma of it. So there's not really any stigma now in male use of drugs. There's still a huge stigma about female use of drugs, massive. And obviously in America, it's because it's still illegal. So obviously they can't be open about it and people lose sponsorships and things. But I know in England now that like use isn't illegal, so people are kind of now pushing a little bit more, particularly people who are no longer in the sport and are no longer doing what they're doing. So hopefully like that.
That's the only thing I think. That's the only thing I think that's changed massively over the last few years is more people being open and changing the stigma. Certainly in the UK, like I remember when it was when Ben Coomer did a podcast with Dave Crossland. Do you remember that? And like he was one of the first people that were talking about like spreading knowledge about gear use to make it safer for people, because he was like, well, people are going to do it anyway. I'm going to make people safer doing it and find better access to things and things like this.
Yeah.
And I remember that being such a controversial podcast. And then if you look at that, and then it was like Jerry Ward and Rich Piana, and like those guys started the discussion. And now there's so many people that are very open about that, which is, and I do think the stigma is starting to change, certainly within the bodybuilding community, but maybe not within the wider world. I still think if you went into an office and said, you know, someone said, "Hey, good weekend," and you went, "Oh yeah, good weekend. I got smashed. I did loads of cocaine." You might get a few upturned noses, but people will be like, "Ah, good weekend." But I think if you came in and go, "Oh yeah, I've got into my training. I'm starting a gear cycle," people would be moving their desks.
Yeah.
You know, like thinking your heart's going to explode and all those kind of things. Which is, I think, we're still a way to go from getting it to where the knowledge to where it sort of needs to be. Because before we kind of have things like peptide use and, you know, benefits of all these things that sort of linked to this, and the anti-aging benefits and the recovery benefits, we've got to go through even just HRT for guys and girls.
Yeah.
We've got to get through the stigma of them being dangerous before people can actually see the actual potential other side of it, which could be game changing for the medical profession.
100%. Now, what I always remember as well, one of my first coaches I worked with, and his massive thing was just how openly accepted like female contraception is.
Yes.
And how like majority of girls my age are running some sort of hormonal contraception, which is completely normalized. However, if you look at it the other way, as some girl running some sort of testosterone based supplement, it would just be absolutely outrageous. And it's quite interesting actually how it is so accepted in one aspect, but switch it around and it's
No, I had a scare. I don't want to say a scare. Scare is not really the right word, but I got my bloods done prior about 3 weeks into my diet, and my testosterone was tanked. It was absolutely through the floor. So I started like looking into hormone replacement therapy, TRT, that sort of stuff. And then when I was speaking to my doctor, who's really, really good, and he was like, "What time do you take the test?" And I was like, "You know, the only slot they had was 4 PM. How long were you fasted? 12 hours. Probably should have been like a day. Okay. You know, did you take supplements in the morning?" Yes. I was like, okay, let's do the test again. And I got the test done, a more comprehensive test, and I was fine. Not only fine, I was on the higher end of normal, like complete change, because testosterone is diurnal obviously in cycle. But like when I was looking at that and I was speaking to, you know, a couple of friends of mine, a couple of clients, I was like going, okay, this is where my blood work came, it's generally open book. And, you know, this is potentially the option. The looks I got, almost like, what? Why would you do that? I was like, well, because it's the healthier option here than having low testosterone. You know, thankfully that wasn't the case and all is well, but you know, like that really does just sum that up. Like even person who, if I medically needed it to feel better, live longer, you know, perform better, it would still have that stigma.
Yeah.
You know, which I still think, as you say, we've got a way to go.
But I think it's different because isn't it quite normalized now in America?
I think it's getting there. Like companies like Revive, I was on a call the other day with Vince Pitstick, who's obviously, you know, trying to increase the knowledge of this sort of stuff. But I think it's getting there. I think the UK is a long way away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. But I think also bodybuilding is still a very niche community in the UK.
Yeah.
And even like my mum has probably been to 15 bodybuilding competitions to watch. And still she sits there and she goes, oh, oh, isn't it disgusting though? And she just can't get her head around it. Because it's just so different. It's such a different look to what people are used to.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's an admirable thing. I think what a lot of people don't see is that even if it's not how you want to look, like I remember like going into when I first started at UP and seeing people like Justin McGuire, who was like 120 odd kilos. I'm like, I don't necessarily want to look like him, but I tell you what, if someone didn't give me any qualification, didn't see any results, and go, who are you training with? I'm training with him. Yeah. Because the work ethic that is shown to get to 100 kilos, I'm almost certain is going to translate over into his business. And, you know, he obviously knows what he's doing to get me 3/4 of the way there.
Yeah.
You know?
Definitely. And then also there's that pressure on PTs though, isn't there? Have you ever found like
I tell you what, like I'd like to think that I was over that now, being, you know, going into my 30s. And I feel like every man in his 30s has this sort of like quarter life crisis where they sort of like the whole training transitions. You see guys start doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu at 31 because suddenly they stop caring about bodybuilding. And I've not gone that way, but I certainly don't mind about how big I am compared to where I was 10 years ago. But leaving a big company where you're sort of hidden, you're sort of sheltered, and sort of going to the world where my competition is now like the hypertrophy coaches of the world and things like that, and the muscle mentors of the world. And like, I it's amazing I still feel it. I was like, to be taken seriously, like, who, if I'm not really lean or really big, how am I standing out on social media? And like, do you, you know, with your guys' social media, obviously you've recently started your own business, you know, transitioning over onto the coaching side of things, you know, a good segue. Because you said you gain muscle quite easily, and you have more muscle mass than the average female, maybe more muscle mass than some of the girls that you will train with might want to have. Do you feel that you having the physique you do has been helpful in terms of cultivating an audience and a reputation, or a hindrance because you're maybe a little bit bigger than what most of your clients would like?
I think it's been helpful with regards to coaching males. So I've always had quite a high proportion of male clients. So since I started freelancing years back, when I started my online coaching, years ago, probably 2016, I think I started online coaching. And because I've shown that I know how to build muscle, guys go, well, actually, she knows how to build muscle. And then guys have more faith in you. Yeah. I think for girls, I think no girls, even I carry quite a lot of muscle. When I get lean, I'm still tiny. Like, I'm still tiny. And I think the fact that I can show that I can still be like smaller, and I have like photo shoot images and things, I think then you need to strategize your marketing as to who are you trying to focus on at that point in time. But yeah, I've had female clients before, and I get quite a lot with females initially, and they're like, oh, well, every female feels the need to tell me they build muscle really easily. So they're like, oh, well, I build muscle really easily, so best not do too much on this, that, and the other. But then what I have to use is obviously showing them like previous clients I've worked with.
Yeah,
and going, well, actually,
I always use the thing. It's like saying that I don't want to pick up a guitar in case I turn into Jimi Hendrix, or they don't want to play piano in case I write a concerto accidentally. And like, you're never going to wake up and be like, holy shit, what happened to my arms? You know, like, I'm sure they weren't there when I went to bed last night.
Yeah.
You know,
but I think as well, it's educating women a lot of the time. I think women think that they can just get muscly by training, and actually, like, I had years where I was eating 3,500, 4,000 calories a day, like desperately trying to push on weight, like limiting my steps at a certain number so I wasn't too active. And like, that's what it takes as a female to actually build muscle, is a hell of a lot of food, like a massive calorie surplus, which when you get a female coming to you saying, oh, I want to lean up and drop some weight, they're not gonna be getting big.
Do you think that a lot of women that think this, especially the women that said, I've done it in the past and I've got too big for my liking, right? You often say that, and you still know that that's not necessarily the case. Do you think there's an element of, I think some girls come in confusing a pump in the gym with gaining tissue? Because a lot of people come in with really high rep workouts, you know, and they're probably going to come in, they see themselves after a gym session and go, don't like that. And don't put two and two together, they don't look like that when they wake up in the morning.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as well, like, I think you get it less now because the desirable image at the moment of a woman is quite athletic. So actually on social media, there's so many like fitness models all over now. Loads of people come and they want to look like a bikini model. It's a big thing. And I think having an element of muscle is now seen as more desirable. So I think that's also helped with women's panic that are going to get massive.
Yeah. With going back on something you said earlier on about like having more muscle mass has helped you when training guys. Like, I've often found that I admire any woman that comes into fitness industry, and it's certainly evening up now. But I remember when I started, it was very much a a male-dominated world. And especially, I think, for a while, I was trying to put a finger on why that was. Is it prejudice in the industry? Is it in the way employers are? Is there just less women interested in it? Because, you know, there are more men interested in sport and they go down that route and it just ends up that way. But I do think there was an element, you know, looking at clientele and looking at what people want. You know, I often found that men want to have train with a man that looks like they want to look. And a lot of women come in wanting someone to tell them what to do, and they assume that that's better if it's a man. And I saw clients come in, female clients ask for male trainers, and male clients come in, ask for male trainers. So, like, going into this world, like, did you find there was an uphill battle for you to face to sort of get respected, approved, get opportunities? Or did you find that was quite easy because of your background?
I think when I started, basically when I started online coaching and I was sort of attracting girls that wanted to do what I'd done, so girls who wanted to like compete in classes I'd competed in, then it was very much beneficial that I was a female because they'd seen that I'd achieved what they wanted to achieve. I've never really had an issue with male clients. So I know where we worked before, I had a few of my female colleagues and they'd be like allocated a male client and all of a sudden they'd be like, oh no, I want a man. And they'd like take the client off them. I think I've only ever had it once in my career. And from when people initially give you a chance, I think once, because I do carry more muscle and I'm strong. And I make a point of, it's almost like an ego thing from my perspective, but I make a point of basically showing guys that I am strong enough to spot them. So if I get a male client and I'm showing them a movement, I will pick up a weight that is a decent weight to demonstrate that movement. Because I don't want them to think that when I'm spotting them, I can't lift that weight off them. So I always, it is a bit of an ego.
No, I think it's a good idea.
I kind of demonstrate my strength initially. I'll pick the dumbbells up, I'll bring them over to them. I'll show them that I am capable. And then from that, you've got that buy-in straight away.
Do you think your physique, sorry to interrupt, do you think your physique is what helped you, or do you think there's an element of like things like that? Do you think that you have a slightly more assertiveness, maybe because you've done it before and you know this is what it needs to do, rather than a lot of girls that come into the industry may not know what it takes to really get in that shape, and because of that they may be not assertive enough to portray that confidence with guys, whereas you're like, this is what you need to do, take it away. Do you feel?
Yeah, I think so. I think as well. So I started training like back up north in like shitty bodybuilding warehouse gyms, and I was probably the only girl in the gym quite a lot of the time. So actually, you've got to just go into that environment and like fake it till you make it kind of thing. You've just got to go into there and pretend you're confident, even if you aren't. And I think sort of having been in those kind of gyms where you are the only German girl in there and you've just kind of got to go, right, okay, this is it. And then I've kind of become confident in those situations, which I think helped as well. And before I started PTing where we PT'd, I worked at a football club. So I was like the only, like probably about one of two women that weren't working in the office. Very male dominated environment. And I think because I'm used to being in those situations, you kind of have that confidence in then being in those situations.
So like if you were looking at, if there's any sort of like aspiring female PTs that are watching this and maybe go and follow you and learn a bit about what you do, what advice would you have of somebody embarking on it? Because, or even actually before you answer that, do you even think these days that it's a male dominated industry still, or do you think it is pretty even now?
I think if you look at the percentage of trainers, there are still more males than females. I think it's quite a less so now because we're doing less one-to-one gym sessions, but it is quite a physical job. And I think actually to be doing that for years and years and years, you need to be quite physically strong. You need to be quite resilient physically. So automatically it's going to attract more men than women. So yeah, I think there's still like a slight imbalance. But there's so many girls in gyms nowadays. There's so many girls, and gyms are really well equipped for women as well. Like loads of gyms have like female only sections. It's just the whole industry has changed so much in like the last 2 or 3 years, in my opinion.
And do you like, actually, before, let's answer the question I was going to go into first before I go segue into that point. But like, if there was a female PT or aspiring female PT, what advice would you give her to sort of make an impact in this industry and like get her head out from the water?
I think just being passionate about your own training, but kind of like finding your niche. So for me, put me into a session with a client where I'm doing a bodybuilding style workout and I'm so confident. If you put me in front of a group class and told me to do a HIIT session, I would be, that's my worst nightmare. I would be completely out of my comfort zone. So I think it's just kind of making sure that, yes, learn as many aspects of training as possible. I've just started doing like a CrossFit training plan because it's not something I've ever done before. And it's quite good for me and my own progression to learn like different styles of training. But I think really just finding your niche and finding what you're good at, identifying your clientele and making sure that you're kind of following that rather than trying to be a jack of all trades.
And how do you feel like moving from like trainer to client sort of centric here? And you mentioned about early on about like the look that women want now is more strong and gyms are more kitted out for women. I mean, where do you think like as regards to the information that's out there in like, maybe it's hard to ask you this question because we're both sort of in a bubble where we tend to are surrounded by the good people in this industry. But do you feel that like where do you feel that the information is in terms of female training? Because I remember a number of years ago, you know, the knowledge out there for actually how females should train was severely lacking. It was still the Gillian Anderson sort of like high rep sort of HIIT classes type of thing. Like, where do you think like the knowledge base is there for women? Do you think there's a lot out there now of actual good information, or do you still feel that there's work needs to be done?
I think it depends where you look, doesn't it, with things like this? There's so many different, obviously if you're reading women's magazines to get your fitness tips, it's going to be completely different with you like just go on YouTube. But I think as well, there's so many apps nowadays that you can download or subscribe to for like £5 a month, where actually it's a lot more accessible. But I think for good information, you still have to go and seek it out rather than just sort of waiting for it to come to you.
I think that up until the pandemic, I think there was certainly a big shift in quality education out there for women. I had a lot more inquiries, on people coming into our old gym that were wanting to be strong, wanting to push limit, wanting to like go into the weight room and learn about that sort of stuff. And I worry that the pandemic has pushed that back a couple of years, because with home training and lockdown workouts, you're sort of pushing your way back towards Joe Wicks every second of the day, really. And like, do you feel like does your business change, or did the kind of people that were attracted to what you do and your followers, did that change during the pandemic? Like, how did you find that change?
I think people more were focused on health. But I found, which actually is a shift that I think my view has echoed it. So I found that people weren't so concerned with being lean. People don't want to get like, there's still a small percentage that want to get like in photo shoot shape. Most people just want to feel healthier, like get a nice sustainable approach to their nutrition. They want to learn like what kind of foods they should be eating day to day, but they don't necessarily want to be following a meal plan or tracking everything they eat. So I think people kind of want to be healthy, but in a lifestyle sense now. Whereas I think previously people kind of got into it and they wanted to go all guns blazing for like 12, 16 weeks. Yeah. And do you think whereas now it's like a lifestyle. People are willing to have PT long term or have a coach long term.
And do you think that's the pandemic that sort of has created that sort of shift, because health's become the forefront of our mind, especially with issues with mental health, with lockdowns and things like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely had an impact. I think people had more time as well. So people were stuck at home. More people did, like you say, Joe Wicks, not something I'd do personally, but people they put it on for an hour because they had a spare hour at home, or they were working from home, or they were trying to entertain the kids. And actually those people who might have done nothing started doing something because of it.
Yeah. And like, because when remind me when you moved out to Dubai?
Beginning of this year in January.
So you literally almost as everything started kicking off in terms of like, like second lockdown just finished, and then like, how was moving to a new country, and how did, like, regards from training perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, how was moving countries during a pandemic?
It was from like routine,
Yeah,
or
from your
it's been massively unsettled. I think I've probably been here just coming up to 10 months, just over 10 months. And yeah, like I'm still not in a routine really being over here. I find Dubai opened up a lot more before everywhere else did. And it was almost that, like, we've been locked in for so long. Like, I want to go out and enjoy myself. So yeah, I think over here people are eating and drinking out a lot, which is a big Dubai thing anyway. But I think also there is that element of freedom again after being penned in and being locked away.
Yeah, I think it's Hong Kong is a weird thing during the pandemic. Also, I moved out here August 2019. It was when I moved out.
Yeah,
Last day of July, and I felt 6-7 months of Hong Kong pre China creeping in, pre-pandemic, where you could pop over to Thailand for a weekend. People were out every single weekend. People were getting smashed, and then like the world has sort of changed over the course, because we never really got a full lockdown, but bars shut early. We never really opened up, and we're still in the sense we still have a mandatory mask rule. We still have a 3-week quarantine to go anywhere. We're completely locked in, and it's amazing how there's almost changed. Like, I feel the social aspect of Hong Kong is nowhere near where it used to be, and I don't think it's opening up for at least another year.
You don't think?
No, I think this is going to be my third Christmas here in a row. And they want to open up with China first, and they've just put New Zealand on the ban list because they decided to declare themselves they're going to live with the virus. So China was like, nope, no, we don't want to go with anything, because they want a zero policy. Apparently, we're not allowed to open up until there's 100% of people vaccinated, which is totally.
Will that ever happen?
Well, that's my argument. We haven't had a single case in about 6 months.
Yeah.
At this stage, it's the masks are causing more harm than they're doing, and that's not me being an anti-masker, because there isn't a case. I could get struck. I'm more likely to get struck by lightning 3 times, like eaten by a shark on land, than catch COVID in Hong Kong. Yeah, but but
it makes it hard. I found that initially, because I know when I first moved out here, mum and dad booked their flights to come here before I'd even booked my flight. So I had like visits planned in, and then as England, so Dubai wasn't on the red list when I moved here, and literally as soon as I moved here, within like 3 weeks they put us on. So I think that was difficult, because I was like, it's just a 7-hour flight away, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. It was a hotel quarantine.
Yeah.
Did you train? It's opened up a lot now.
Did you
training?
Yeah.
See, my training, it'd been a bit all over in England, because obviously we locked down, opened the gym, shut them again. So I'd been doing like home training. So I came here and I was really motivated, like join the gym. I was like, oh my God, so many cool bits of kit. And I went like absolutely all in for like 12 weeks, and then fried myself, and then lost my motivation a little bit. And then I've kind of been like fits and bursts since I've been over here, and kind of just need to get that structure back in again now.
Yeah,
I still train, but I've just not. Before I was very much like push pull legs first, upper lower. Whereas now I've like mixed up my training a little bit more. Like I'll go to a yoga class, or I'll go like do a spin class, or I'll just go and do some cardio, or do like a HIIT session, or I'll do like my normal weight session still.
Would you say you've got your mojo back for training now? Because obviously that's a big departure from someone who was so motivated with regards to training. To lose that. What do you feel that was the thing that finally stopped you, having that like vigor for training, and how did you sort of get out of that funk? Because I'm supposed that everyone will go through that at some point. So like, and I know
I think it's hard. I think sometimes you just got to accept that you're not going to want to train for a few weeks. And in the past, so when I was competing, I just wouldn't have let myself do that. I'd just pushed myself through sessions and not enjoyed it. But nowadays, what I'll do, I still, like, don't get me wrong, I still train weights at minimum 3 times a week. So like I was away last week in the Maldives and I still trained twice a week. I still trained twice in the gym and I did a yoga class and like kayaking and cycling and things. But now what I'll do is I'll focus more on being busy. So I'm like, all right, I don't necessarily have to go to the gym. I can go for a walk, or I can do, like, I'll still be active. And that's kind of my focus now on days where the last thing I want to do is drive to the gym and like blast for a session. I kind of just go, actually, well, as long as I go and move and I do something that's going to make me feel better, then actually you don't need that guilt of, I didn't train today. Like, you can always train tomorrow, as long as you're training across the week and as long as you're moving. But I think that's also like my shift in mindset now.
I think as well, it's when you go through that shift in mindset, you realize that you're not going to lose all your gains if you take a week off the gym. I got an interview a few months back with Stefan Cazalt from Kilo Strength, and he blocks in. He does like 12-week mesocycles where he always has week 13 is always active recovery week, where he tells his clients to get away from the gym, like go do something else, be active. But, and then come back and hit another 12-week block, and it fits nicely into his year and things like this. And I think that's quite a good thing, because you want to, when you've got a client, you're trying to strike that balance between making them love training, but not getting them into that mindset, segueing almost back into the bodybuilding thing of understanding your clients aren't bodybuilders, and where is that line between enough to push to get them to the goals and push them out of the comfort zone without making them dependent on MyFitnessPal and sort of training 3, 4, 5 times a week. Do you find that was a hard balance to find with working with clients who maybe weren't as initially motivated as you were? Because I see a lot of people that come from bodybuilding to personal trainers, and I don't think many of them have made the impact that I know you have made. And I think a lot of that is because they've got a mindset of it has to be this way. Did you find it took you a while to sort of like develop a balanced approach or with your clients, or was it something that sort of came naturally to you?
So what actually helped me hugely was, when we went into lockdown in England and we shifted to doing virtual training sessions. And I think previously I'd been kind of like a bit like, no excuses, like it's 10,000 steps, come on, it's not that hard. And then we did virtual training. And I remember I'd be on Zoom to a client, and they'd have like their laptop set up in the background because it was supposed to be like online at that time, and then have like their child over there watching TV, like trying to keep themselves entertained. And actually I went, these people, their life is so much different to mine. Yeah. Like they're working 10, 12-hour days, sat down, and they've got a family, and they've got to do the food shopping and the cleaning, and they've got to look after the child and wash them and put them to bed. And actually sometimes you can't go, well, you need to be in the gym 5 days a week, and you need to do your steps, and you need to eat exactly this meal plan. And for me, like, that was a massive eye-opener, kind of just seeing, like, it's weird when you see somebody in the gym, it's your environment, but when you actually see somebody in their environment, it really helped me. And it really helped me to like switch my mindset of what my expectations of clients should be. And you might not get as a good result as if they were 100% dedicated to a 5-day-a-week plan, nailing the steps and things. But actually they're going to enjoy the process, and it might take them an extra few weeks to get to where they want to, but they might carry on training afterwards. Because that's always my big thing now, is I never want a client to like train with me for 12 weeks and then stop training and not enjoy it. Like, I'd rather they just trained. It took them 4 or 5 months to get to where they want to be, but actually they go, oh, I really enjoy doing this kind of workout, or I really enjoy doing this, and that's something they then continue on with.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. My aim with regards to training, I've always been known for having pretty good retention rates, and the thing from early on for me was I want to teach a client to have all the information they need to be able to do it on themselves, but because they enjoy the process, they don't want to. Like that's the thing. And I think a lot of coaches struggle with that kind of retention because they don't want to give everything away. They don't want to give away the secrets. And I'm like, no, because it creates a better coaching relationship where you can work together with somebody where they sort of know what to do with their diet and training. So it's more of a conversation like, hey, so what do you want to change here? Oh, okay, I can do this. Okay, let's monitor this. And it becomes a team effort. And I think that you end up with a better coaching relationship with that. And I think, what you were saying in regards to it taking a little bit longer and finding that sort of like that balance. I think even, you might find that some people you can push straight away and get that jaw-dropping result. But some people doing that, they might not be ready for that in the first 12 weeks. And sometimes finding a middle ground might mean they become ready for that 6 to 8 months down the line, where they have an event put in the diary. I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
And you may have not gotten your chance with that client if you drove them into the dust when they weren't ready. Like going back and talking about you trying to force competing in shows when you're not feeling it.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same as someone wanting a diet and not feeling it.
Definitely. And it's just about, what's like achievable for you at that point, I think. And what you're going to enjoy, and also like how ready you are for that change. Because some people just don't have the education behind it as well, like nutrition wise. You're telling people they've got to like weigh out every macro if they don't know what
a macro is.
Yeah, sometimes you just got to like ease into it a little bit more slowly and take the time and educate people, and they'll stick around with it for longer, and they'll change their lifestyle rather than just sticking to a plan for a few weeks.
And then crashing and burning. So, to bring this full circle, so I want to always like to end with a couple of questions. And I never ever plan these because it's completely dependent of the conversation that we've had. If there was one thing like that's you've taken away from bodybuilding that's helped you in other aspects of your life, what do you think that would be?
I think just the level of dedication. And when we say it's like those days that you didn't die, like the days that you're pretty sure you're not going to survive that day, but you always do. And I think for me now, like it's something in other aspects, it's not even like being hungry, being tired, but you're having a really shit day. And you go, well, you're going to be all right, because all those days on prep when I didn't die. And kind of just learning that you can kind of power on through those situations.
Yeah. So, and what's your goal with your training now? Now you mentioned CrossFit, you mentioned doing different things. What's next for you?
So for me, I'm actually just starting like a new training split. So I want to get back into like more of my bodybuilding style training. But I also want to keep up, like in the CrossFit that I've been doing, my cardiovascular fitness in like 3 weeks of doing this style of training is just so much better. And I just feel so much fitter. And I was very much like anti-cardio before. So just keeping in like finishes to my sessions and just keeping up like my cardiovascular fitness a little bit more. I've always had like really high steps. So like previously in London, I could hit like 25,000 steps a day. So I never felt the need to, well, my body recovery wise probably wouldn't have coped either, but like to do additional cardio. But I think for me now, like I want to be strong. I want to be like muscly, but I also want to be like fit and healthy.
I think if your conditioning's improved so much in the last 3 weeks, I think there's some like big, massive death circuits that need to be incorporated into your plan now. Like something brutal. Now you can deal with the higher volume. Something brutal. I remember doing a workout with Akash Vakela, who owns R&T. And it was in between Christmas and New Year. And we were like just getting back into it after a few days off. And we were the only ones in the gym. And he was like, "Si, do you want to do a workout? Nothing crazy, just like a full body, 4 exercises, just, get a bit of a pump on." And we just actually wrote it there and then on the spot. Like, a lower push, lower pull, upper push, blah, blah. So we came up with the idea of doing Nordic curls on the glute ham raise.
Right.
Into ring push-ups, into left leg Bulgarian split squats, into right arm single arm rows, into right leg Bulgarian split squats, into left arm single arm rows. And it was just the pairing of the split squats for going upper, lower in just alternating arms and legs. I have never been something so cardiovascularly brutal. Muscular-wise, I've dealt with crazy high volume workouts that made me sick. And there was just something about this that just knocked me for 6.
That's grim.
What's the toughest workout you've ever done? That's a good question to one of the closing questions.
So when I first started training, I trained on my own for a bit, and then I actually made a friend in the gym. Weird story. He had the same surname as me, and people used to think he was my brother. We trained together, and we used to do chest and legs on the theory that nobody trains legs as hard as they train chest. And we used to do bench press into back squat, barbell back squat. And it was just awful. Like I just remember supersetting back squat and chest press, and it was just grim.
Yeah, I did a block like that recently. So I'm signed up with a coach in America. And his first block that he gave me was basically what he calls a systemic block, very N1 style training, which is basically half body GBC.
Yeah.
And it was basically front body, back body, rest, front body, back body. It was like split squats. Heel elevated split squat with a pause at the bottom for like 2 seconds into dumbbell press with a pause at the bottom for 2 seconds. And that was a wake-up call. I hadn't trained anything like that in a long time. I felt good for it, though.
It's always when you get to the end and you're like, you survived it.
And I feel healthier, like similar probably to you for CrossFit. I feel healthier having gone through a block like that. So what is the best thing about moving to Dubai? And secondly, what is the best restaurant in Dubai? So when I sometime come back.
Best thing about moving to Dubai, I think my lifestyle here is just so much better. Like compared to London's so expensive for accommodation. But yeah, you can afford so much more for your money. And it's nice to, when you're in your 30s, to actually be able to afford to rent an apartment for yourself. And the weather's great. Best restaurant, I'm trying to think, where have I been that's really good? There's LPM in DIFC, which is very nice, like a French restaurant. Or Zuma. Zuma is amazing. But
there's a Zuma here. I love it. It's really
so expensive,
really though. Expensive. Ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
So for anyone who wants to find out more about you, your bodybuilding, your training now, where can they find you?
Instagram's probably. I'm so active on Instagram, but yeah, Instagram's probably the best place.
Which is, I'll put it in the show notes, but just for
cool. On Amy Wills Fitness.
Awesome, cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome. It's good to chat to you.
Always. See you soon.